So, my dears, as the sunshine of this little heat wave, or big heat wave, of ours streams in at my morning window, let me sit with you in imagination to think about Virginia Woolf's great novel. You've just met, if you have kept pace with my intended progress through the book, or when you do, if you catch up later, you've encountered the two celebrated glories, the twin glories, in my mind at any rate, of the book. The dinner scene, which is a glory, I think, in most readers' experience of the book, or those who are fond of the book are struck by how the book flowers into this extraordinary multi-dimensional, multi-perspective view of a dinner party from many points of view, and how it shifts, how the mood shifts, how the story of an evening around a table changes its moods and can grow and withdraw. An extraordinary image of the psychology of social living. And this enables her, obviously, to expand our sense of the different characters and our sense of the difference between people, of how the great, the huge abyss that separates people is suddenly bridged in an instant, and then reasserts itself, and how this is the nature of interaction between people as represented in literature. And then, of course, the shock on many levels of the section called Time Passing. Time passes in which time does indeed pass in a way that is the other side of time, not time infinitely expanding as in an evening to create a miniature epic over a number of hours, but time in its devastating speed in retrospect of how much ground is covered in a few years, how many live their most intense hours, how many die, and her Woolf's choice of how to tell this always seems to me so extraordinary. I was amazed the first time I ever came across it. I thought, no, you can't do this. You've got us into a mood of inspection and subtle distinctions between people, such masterly storytelling, to abandon this and leap away almost to a newsreader's account of history. That seemed to me to be alarming, terrifying, as indeed was the World War. So she finds a quite unexpected way of conveying to us the horror of the event, the difference between the world before and the world brought to our characters by World War One, and not only to changing the lives of the characters, but changing the life of the collective. They can never be what they once were around that dinner table, even though one or two of them, like Mr. Carmichael, achieve great distinction when his new volume of poems is mentioned as having been published, mentioned as briskly and quickly as the death of a number of our beloved characters, including above all Mrs. Ramsay, who we can't do without. She was the engine of the world that we were in the first part of the book. Everyone ran to her. Everyone depended on her. We, as readers, bathed in her inspiration, her motherliness. How will the world continue without her? This indeed was as the dilemma that death brings into most lives at some point or another, and which a hideous event like the First World War brought simultaneously into the lives of so many people. There were few lives untouched by that war. So we get a sense not only of what we as readers are losing of that particular family that we have come to love so much, if we have, but a sense of what the entire country was suffering. I do want to mention my concern for and respect for anybody to whom this seems a tedious tale, with nothing of any consequence happening, and a lot of people fussing and fretting over a beef stew in the dinner, and the nuances of their feelings towards each other, which could produce a massive so what on the part of someone who has not been engaged by the writing, and indeed disappointment when you come at last to action writ large and it turns out to be dismissed in a few words: the deaths, the bomb going off. And so for those who are really not enjoying the book greatly, or are somehow mildly indifferent to the whole thing, I can see that it really could be me, or any enthusiast for something that doesn't capture your excitement, me just babbling on about a piece of writing that doesn't move you at all. So, and that is how it should be. I think it's terribly important, to me at least, always to be completely respectful of those who are not captured by something that I'm captured by. It's so important that in art that not everyone has to submit to agreement about something. Art, above all, is an identifying of individual affinities between a particular artist and a particular reader or viewer who is captured suddenly by something that they can't identify themselves. I can never really identify what it is that captures me in Woolf. It's in the blind spot. It's part of one's inability to completely see oneself, and that's what's, I think, so lovely about art, is the mystery, is the indecipherable way in which things grab you or totally fail to grab you. So for those who are not grabbed, I hope as we move on to other books, we'll replace this with a grabbing experience. So I've asked you a few things in the quiz, which I wanted to unpack a little, and I see that I've asked you to track down Sonnet 98 in Shakespeare's sonnets, because the line before, nor praise the deep vermilion in the rose, is an exact counterpart of the erotic nature of that line, erotic in its sound, and also in its reference to the rose, which is the home of physical love in poetry, symbolic, and the deep vermilion is an entry into the bedroom symbolic life. And the line before is a very precise description of a world without sensuousness, but equally important. And the balance between those two lines, is something which in some ways evokes the balance between the Ramsays, the mystery of the marriage of opposites as is contemplated by their children, who look at them and think, these two people, how do they manage? And their guests as well, fascinated by the sternness, the distance, the surprisingness of Mr. Ramsay, and the absolutely unfailing and reliable peace that Mrs. Ramsay brings. So that's the reason I've sent you to that line. And then, of course, the issue of parentheses, which she deploys in a manner nobody really had done before. They start to multiply during the dinner as a way of jumping back and forth. Almost within a line, you can jump to somebody else in a parenthesis, as you do in the square brackets that she uses to such extraordinary effect in Time Passes, where there are no more points of view except the exalted, godlike point of view of a nameless narrator, different kind of novel altogether, enabled by Mrs. McNabb to make contact with the past, with the people who once inhabited this house, about whom Mrs. McNabb thinks and takes us to them to keep us in touch with the Ramsay family. And we dart to and fro with the much slower time frame that the house itself lives in, aging very slowly, creaking door hinges very, very slowly giving up their perches, and the house flaking away to its own much slower tempo. Centuries pass as the house itself moves towards its own death and decay. So there are many versions of time, time in its slowness, time in its terrible suddenness, time in its subtle valleys and mercies and surprises and lost brooches. Many things that a grandmother's brooch, which has lasted so long and suddenly in a flash is gone, in the kind of flash that takes our characters out of life. So easy for an author to do. You can kill a character so swiftly. Nobody can stop you. And yet, it's such a huge thing to do. It represents so much in a book that is beautifully written, and in an author who feels the full responsibility of what fiction is. So I hope that you are enmeshed in the book, that the magic of it works on you, and if not, I hope that another book will. We move on towards the conclusion of the book, which has its own versions of closure, which are powerful, I think, and satisfying, with this extraordinary section in the middle. How could she have thought of it? Most of her books are written in an interesting, provocative, novel style, something new which saturates the book with its own rules. And this is different. She reinvents the rules for the middle section and dramatically sews together the two surrounding sections with this astounding synoptic style that she's invented for the book. But to have changed the style within the book so radically, this is an incredible tour de force. For me, maybe for others, this is not what draws their attention. For me, the construction here absolutely fascinates me each time I come across it. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you're enjoying something of this summer within the confines of our plague, sequestration. I hope you're getting a bit of sunshine in a nice way and not just as heat. And I'm thinking of all of you, especially those of you who took the trouble to write to me and send me a little video so that I can see you. Best to every one of you, and we'll speak again soon. Bye.